Let me check with her.
Okay, so I am delighted to have us follow up on the very productive meetings that we have had on the subject of racial profiling. I am equally delighted to be having Darlene Flynn, the Department Director for the Office of Race and Equity. She is going to join us this evening. And as soon as we just check in with everyone to find out how everybody's doing, we can move forward. Hopefully that will give Chair Peterson an opportunity to join, and perhaps Mr. Bay as well. So how is everyone doing? We can do a little popcorn. Lieutenant Hubbard?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you for asking. Happy to join you all this evening.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your diligence and your hard work. We do appreciate it. Deacon Lyles?
Doing well. And I'm
Perfect.
glad to put a face with the name Darlene Flynn. I've heard so much wonderful things about you.
Darlene is a bad woman.
Yeah, your reputation is far and wide.
Precedes you.
Thank you. Thank you for what you do.
Commissioner Garcia Acosta?
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see
Good
you,
evening.
Director Flynn. Welcome. You're making this awesome group even awesomer, and so it's great to see everyone this evening. And no worries about a little bit of your tardiness, Commissioner Jackson. You know, it's been a long day, so just glad to see everyone here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna need that hat. So let me know how much it costs, and I want one.
There you go.
And absolutely not necessarily last, but maybe not. Ms. Darlene, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I had some, I'm recovering. I have been working a limited schedule this week, so I should be fine. I
my
had worked too
goodness.
hard today. Yeah, I've been working though, so it's okay. I just paced myself. So
Look, the way you work, I just want to make sure, do you have some water and some orange juice and maybe even some Gatorade, right?
yeah, well, I'm hydrated. I'm ready to go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And let's see if Chair Peterson has been able to join. Not yet. But what we can do, I'm just going to put you a little bit on the spot, Darlene. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of your office, why you do what you do as a subject matter expert, and perhaps some of the impact I know that you have had inside the city of Oakland?
Well, gosh. So I feel like people must know my story by now. I was recruited about 7 years ago down from the city of Seattle to stand up the first Department of Race and Equity for the city of Oakland in response to a city council ordinance asking for that to happen. And I've been here since then. It's been a real honor to serve in that capacity. I had the good fortune of being part of one of the architects of the Race and Social Justice Initiative that started in Seattle, Washington about 20 years ago. So I came with a lot of experience, which really helped. And then I got to marry that up with Oakland's enthusiasm for justice, and have had just an amazing time working with the people here in Oakland. Most of my time is spent working with city employees, because the way we work is to do transformational institution system change work from the inside out. So I don't deliver direct services to the community. I do respond to requests to speak about what we do and that sort of thing, but I am really focused on the 4,000 plus city employees and how we do our work and our policies, practices, and procedures, and most importantly, learning to analyze what kind of impact we're having on marginalized communities. That's the real difference between this and equity and diversity and inclusion work, is that we're really focused on outcomes. So we're learning how to make changes and then measure for whether or not they made a difference. That's the difference between this and race work that came before, is that we're really focused on how institutions roll and what our impacts are and how we can change, and trying to get people excited and enthusiastic about making those changes. I'm excited, obviously, about it. I've been doing it for a long time. And what keeps me up or gets me up in the morning and keeps me up even when things get hard, because I always tell people I never said it was going to be easy. I just said it was going to be worth it. Is that I mean, we get paid to do this, and it's very rare for institutions to take anything, to take this kind of work to this level. Most institutions do a lot of lip service about diversity and inclusion and call it good to go. And they may even, now they call it DEI, so they stick the equity word in the middle, but they're not really changing very much. And I like to say, you know, the civil rights movement gave us a seat at the table. That was a long time ago. and I benefited from that to some degree because of the time that I entered the workforce. They gave us a seat at the table, but that seat at the table hasn't created justice and parity and equity and just outcomes consistently across our systems. So we're now evolving into this new work, and Oakland is just, it's been so welcoming and so supportive. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be here tonight and grateful for the support that I've gotten from people like Regina and others that I probably don't even know to keep this work going.
Well, thank you very much for that overview. Now I'd like for you to get a little granular, if you don't mind, because I'd like the entire audience to hear a little bit about the work that you and now Deputy Police Chief Fred Chavies did together for the police department. Would you mind just giving us an overview so they know what has gone on specific to the police department?
Sure. My phone is buzzing for some reason. I thought everybody'd be gone by now.
Everybody wants you.
It's distracting. I'm going to turn it over. I don't think it's an emergency. Well, what Lieutenant Chavies and I did. Is he still a lieutenant? I haven't talked to him in a little while. I'm going to assume.
No, he's been promoted. He's interim deputy police chief. I mean, he just popped right up.
Yeah,
So-
well, it was bound to happen. So
Yeah.
glad to hear it. I thought I heard something a little different, but it didn't really stick. So then Lieutenant Chavies approached me because we do a lot of training, and I'm the lead trainer in how to do this work. And also the background, you know, the analysis, the viewpoint from which we do this work, which is a little different than the way race work used to get done 20, 30 years ago. We're taking a very different approach. So we don't assume that people know how to do this systemic, focused, outcome-driven work. And we do training, and there's a basic academy. It's a 4-part series. It used to be 3.5 hours. Now we do it on Zoom, so we give people a break. And it's only 2.5 hours, 4 sessions. And it covers a broad overview of what drives this kind of race and equity work. And he just snuck into a class, and I didn't know who he was. He was plain clothes that day. And he was just there, and it's always a mixed class. You know, people come from all the different departments. So, you know, I'm not surprised to see new and different people there. And after the class, he approached me and he said, hey, he introduced himself and he said, I'm interested in seeing if we could bring this training into the police department. And he said, I think that we could adapt this work and make it salient or relevant to police context. And I'd like to see if we could start doing the same kind of approach in the police department. So of course I said yes, if you will train it with me, which is a huge ask. That's a huge ask because we're actually doing anti-racism work, which, you know, is easier in some contexts than others. And the anti-racism we're talking about is systemic racism, but it's still anti-racism work. And so to ask him to train with me as an officer, I didn't necessarily expect him to say yes, but he didn't hesitate to say absolutely. And so I said, great, let's go. So we ran a few classes. We put the command staff through the 4 modules, and then we ran, I think, 2 more open classes that anyone was invited to come to. And they went really well. And by the end of those 3 or 4 sessions, we did one for field officers too. We did a little mini training for field officers, training officers. I'm probably saying that wrong. So we did a few little trainings around the department, and he was amazingly good at it. It's very hard to train trainers to do what I do. Not everybody's comfortable and relaxed and easy. You have to demonstrate a comfort level so that other people can relax. And it's hard for a lot of people. And he's a natural. So it went really well. I thought we were getting some traction, but then we lost our police chief. So when we lost our police chief, I know I don't have to tell people in the police department this, but it put everything on tilt. And it's been pretty much a tilt-a-wheel since then. And we've never gotten back to it. So it kind of, I don't know, we got a new chief, you know, maybe this one will stick long enough that we'll find our equilibrium and get back to it. Because I do think that our approach is designed to go to people if we need to, and to speak to their context with the same exact content that we were giving the rest of the city. We just made it contextual for police work. So, and he was able to bring that to it. I would not have been able to do that, and I don't have any legitimacy to do it. I've never been an officer. So it was a really nice partnership. It can happen again. And DRE, that's the short for our department. We do this all the time. We do it with any audience that will sit still for it, because it's just about reaching enough people and moving enough people to action for change. So it's our theory of change, but for a second, we were actually inside the police department, stirring it up a little bit.
So I'm delighted to hear that, and I want you to get your seatbelt ready, because I'm sure that both Chair Peterson and myself will be, I want to say requesting, but probably more aggressively speaking to the chief about the importance of revisiting this, and for him to be one of the first people to sit through the 4-part training.
And by
it's
the way,
incredibly important.
Chief Kirkpatrick sat through it. I mean, she was there. It was kind of surprising because I know her radio was buzzing, and she was there for all 4 academies. And that meant a lot to the command staff to have her go through the training with them. And so that's how it kicked off. I think that's a really important piece. We call that walking the talk, and it needs to happen. Why should anyone, step out on trust, if leadership's not walking the talk? So it was important, and she did it. And the other thing is, just so you know, what that leads up to is through those trainings, we begin to identify people that are ready to take it to the next level and become part of an equity team for the department that then partners with the Department of Race and Equity to look at the work together, so that I'm never in there doing it without staff from that department. That's our model. That's how we do it in all the departments, not just the police department. That's how we roll. So we train enough people, we put enough people through this training that they begin to self-identify as wanting to be part of the change effort. And that's how we get, and then we stand up an equity team, and then we start to work with leadership. And it's very in some ways relationship based, but also it's a process. We don't expect people to go from 0 to 60. It just doesn't work like that in any department. It just doesn't. You have to prepare people for change. You have to explain what the change is. You have to make a compelling business case for the change. There's all these elements of change management that we have built in. So I look forward to hearing from y'all.
Okay, well, I'm going to want you to hold space for those commissioners that are going to want to be trained, as well as I'm sure there's some community members, a la Deacon Lyles probably, that want to receive the wonder of the training. I think that we all have some, we all have assumptions and presumptions in our background, and we need to come together and understand how empowering and debilitating they can be. So I want to thank you for all of that. Do you all have any questions? Darlene?
I see a hand.
Okay, you see a hand. Yay, let's call on the hand. I can't see it.
Is that you, Micah?
No, it's marked up. It's Chair Peterson.
But her name is Darlene Flynn.
Yeah, it says Darlene Flynn, but that's Chair Peterson. That's why I didn't know who it was. Hi, Chair Peterson.
Let me change that for her,
Yeah, thank you. Chair Peterson, are you here?
I can hear. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, and we can see you too now. Yay.
All right, great. Well, for one, I want to welcome and thank Ms. Flynn for being a part of this and making this presentation to us. It's certainly long overdue. We need your help. We are still struggling with that number one challenge, which is the change in the culture of the police department, because every time it looks like we're getting close to making it out of the negotiated settlement agreement, some other crisis is exposed and created, and we're dealing with it, but it still reflects poorly on our ability to say we are ready. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the recent machinations of our city, our own city council, that will have the effect of destabilizing the commission. Of course, you may know or may not know, or everybody probably knows by now, that our IG, Michelle Phillips, is leaving for a larger opportunity, which is, of course, anyone who is blazing a career line would be expected after 2.5 years or so to move on. So we are challenged right now, and our goal is to keep the commission steady, to get our vacancies filled, and to grapple with this racial profiling matter that is one of the key matters that we need to address at the police commission. And we couldn't be happier to have Commissioner Regina Jackson as our head, and the members of our community that have joined. We couldn't do it without them either. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Chair Peterson. Before you join, we were talking about how the racial profiling training was going along very steadily, and then we lost our chief, and then it kind of stopped. So I will be hoping that in your very first meeting with Chief Mitchell, that you will ask that he model what both Kirkpatrick and Armstrong have modeled in participating in the training, to demonstrate, their commitment both for themselves and their increased knowledge, as well as for all the staff.
Do we have a date for the training?
No. I'll work with Darlene offline, because I'm making this request live in our meeting, and we have to figure out, she's actually recovering. So we want her to get fully well, and to be able to determine who her next partner, not in crime, but in training, is going to be, because what was Lieutenant Shavies is now interim Deputy Chief Shavies. So we will get it worked out and figure out what works best and when we can launch. But Darlene will need to think about that, and what kind of resources she has to be able to facilitate something.
Yeah, and I think it'll be important. There's some steps into getting ready to launch a training like this too, where we get the chief on board, the new chief on board. Obviously, with having Armstrong there, that's going to be helpful because he'll be able to represent what it is. He won't have to take my word for it. and I think that then we usually
let me correct you. You said Armstrong. You meant Shavies.
I meant Shavies.
Yeah, we were hoping, but
Yeah, I'm sorry. I meant Shavies. I get so confused sometimes. Anyway, Shavies will be able to help represent it and help, socialize the new chief into the ideas a little bit, preliminarily. And then usually I would probably do a presentation once he gets his command staff finalized. So I think we want to fit it into the pacing of the chief coming on board and the chief making his cabinet clear. And I don't know, maybe there are no more changes to be made. Maybe he's all done, but it takes it, or maybe there won't be any changes. Well, there's been already, so obviously. So I think that probably what should happen is if you plant the seed, then I can follow up on it with Fred and find out what he thinks about timing. And again, it's partly about understanding, for me, it's about coming in a way that it can land as positively as possible, even in a difficult environment. And as far as culture change, it's the toughest part. There's no doubt about it. And some departments have stronger cultures than others. And that's just part of usually it's related to the line of business. When you have command control, when you have, some of these very regulated sort of ways of being, that's not going to be your most flexible culture. It's just not. It's built right into the model. So we adapt to that. But we don't give up on the ultimate goal, and we just understand that it's going to take a while, and we're going to have to be strategic and find the people that can help us move that change through the organization. I certainly can't do it by myself. Neither could Fred, or I mean, it's not about one person. It's about rallying the troops. So.
Right. And to that end, I'm really, really proud, because Deputy Chief Shavies is one of my kids from the East Oakland Youth
I
Development Center.
know, I know.
So I will go directly to him to see what he thinks about prepping the chief for this. And then Chair Peterson can go to the chief and then find out, you know, based upon his own line of command staff, when they can all do this.
Yeah,
So,
and we want to start with them. We know we want to start with them, and
Yeah.
and it might take a minute for the dust to settle. I understand that, but I do think planting the seed now and beginning to, you know, feel that out will get us there sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And forgive this because we, you know, typically go straight in and are very aggressive on our documentation. And I know Lieutenant Hubbard is waiting to, you know, have us start going over M19, but I did want to, as long as you've had an opportunity to review it. And if you haven't, no stress.
I actually did read through it today.
Oh, great. So what
Yeah,
I was going to
I did.
actually ask was about the cultural accountability statement, because it is the first of its kind that we have ever considered. And I thought it was going to be critically important to ensure that we make it a part of the policy such that all officers and, you know, whatever members of the community review policy get a brief lesson in our nation's racial profiling and understand what the commitment moving forward is. We are not a perfect model. We are improving, still have lots of challenges. Like you say, the culture shifts very slowly, but but I'm very pleased to say that, you know, Lieutenant Hubbard and IG Phillips took their first stab, and the rest of the ad hoc committee have really formulated and molded into something that I am extremely proud of. If you've had a chance to look at that, would you just give us a couple comments?
Sure. So I thought that the you called it the cultural
Accountability
statement. I thought it was well written, and I could and you provided your citations, so I know that it came from good sources, and it is very much in alignment with how we explain the conundrum of systemic racism through a historical perspective. That's our approach. We do talk about it. I think the thing that because that's what gets it away from being about, you know, individual people or individual, you know, blame making and shaming and all that stuff. It's like about, no, we were all born into a system. We got here somehow, and here we are. The question is, do we have the critical thinking and the openness of mind to get ourselves out of it? You know, that's really that's where we want to start, is can we rally our incredible, you know, ability to problem solve, to not just keep repeating history, right? And that's where we begin in our training. I mean, that's how we lay it out there, and we say that from the very beginning. So you heard me just say some mitigating words about how this is a blame-free zone. That we don't have to look for who did, who's the bad one, whatever, who's the racist, you know, however you think this is going to go. That's not what we're about, because racism is built into everything, and it manifests in every institution. Doesn't manifest in exactly the same way, but one of the things that does show up in every institution is bias. And racial profiling is nothing but a manifestation of bias. So bias is as real in every other department in the city as it is in the police department, in their practices, and in our hiring practices. It shows up in all kinds of places. So we're always trying to root out activities that flow from bias of any kind, because that is a form of discrimination that can happen on an unconscious level. And especially now, because there was a time when that kind of discrimination against certain groups of people was very socially acceptable. And so it was kind of like people knew when they were doing it because it was socially acceptable and they were doing it out loud. But we've all been well trained since the civil rights movement that it's no longer so socially acceptable. So we have to, so it becomes a little more difficult to name and talk about, because we're no longer doing it out loud on purpose. It's just built into our practices. And that's what we look for when we're trying to deal with systemic racism. So as you work to change behavior and change the culture and change ultimately the data and the outcomes. We always know whether we gotten there or not because the data will tell us. Once you get to that point where you're launching this, you're going to hopefully have begun to shift people's mindset about this equity approach. So you've started in a very equity place. Having said that, sometimes people don't understand this historical approach and they still internalize it as being about them. And it's not about them, it's about us. It's about our society, what our society has tolerated, what our society has perpetuated. In fact, what our society has expected our police departments to be historically, if you go all the way back to the beginning. And so it's not just about one group, or one profession. It's about how do we get the systemic racism out of that function. And we have to do that everywhere across the city. We've got it embedded in lots of places. So some explanation of that might need to go, some preamble that says this is a blame-free discussion, but it is grounded in history. And the purpose of this policy is to drive change that will change outcomes in people's lives and also change the practice of policing in our city. So just some sort of a preamble up front. I can help with that. If somebody wants to take a crack at it, I can edit it. I'm used to saying these kinds of words. And again, this is what we call preparing people for change. Because you don't normally talk about, in a police policy, you don't normally present this history. This is new, just like you said, Regina. People are going to look at that and they're going to say, what's this? And where'd that come from? So you want to have a bit of a preamble. I do in my training where we begin to talk about this. I say, look, I have a big old slide that says blame-free zone. Relax, exhale. We know who did it. We know how it got done. We know why it got done. Chill, just relax. Our task is to have an open mind and do some critical thinking about how we can unwind that and get it out of our institutions. So, and that means people will get to change. We may have to change some of our policies, which you all are working on. You're tightening up the policy, and we may have to change our practice. We may have to practice differently in order to get there. And I know that some of the anti-bias work that was done by Dr. Eberhard built some new practices into how we document stops, right? That officers document stops in a way that they didn't used to get documented. That we call that infrastructure. That's infrastructure. And so infrastructure helps to support the change, but the people still have to change too, right? The behaviors have to change enough that the data starts to change. And so you're partway through the process. You already are, and you might even want to refer to that in that preamble. You could talk about the work that the department has done and how this is building on that work and putting a finer point on. I noticed that in the text of the policy itself. Putting a finer point in a few places, and we call that a feedback loop, right? When you put the finer point out, you say this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to change. Then this is what we're going to check back on to see how we're doing, and this is what the consequences are going to be if we do identify behavior that has not changed. And so you're putting the whole package of infrastructure around culture change together. That usually does take more than one step, and I can see those steps unfolding, so I'm hopeful. I do think it's important to recognize that rewriting a policy alone won't change culture, but it is the combination of tightening up your policy with these other pieces that are getting put in place that are going to ultimately change culture over time. And it will be over time because people change incrementally. And some people change faster than other people. Some people, as soon as they see it, they go, I'm there. I got you. I see what's going on here. I'm done. I'm changed. But that's not usual. That's about 10 to 15% of the population can pivot like that. Most other people have to think about it. They have to understand it deeply. They have to find their intrinsic or internal motivation to change. There's just some process that goes about change, and that's just human beings are wired that way. We're wired to avoid change because it triggers our fear of the unknown, and in our little brain, not our smart brain up here, the other one. And so we have to understand that when we're saying change, people are going to go, what? I strongly prefer not to. Thank you. And so, I mean, they may not say it out loud, but they'll demonstrate it. And so, I think you're in a good spot on this. Like I said, I would add a preamble to your cultural thing to explain the context of that a little bit so that people get used to it. And
Yeah.
And then I found just a couple of passages in the policy itself that I would recommend you take another look at. It's almost like in a couple of places there are too many words. I saw the direction you were going in and I liked it. I mean, I saw what you were doing, but then sometimes there'd be little extra things that would creep in that looked like, just in a couple of places, they were kind of undermining what you had just said or what you said following it. And one of them was where you mentioned suspicious behavior. There's a place where suspicious behavior comes in. And suspicious behavior is highly racialized, because a random white man walking down the street of a white neighborhood is not likely to be seen as being suspicious unless he's literally displaying, open carry maybe, or burglar tools. Maybe he's got a ski mask on, covering his face, or something. I mean, but it takes almost nothing for a Black man to look suspicious to community. And we know this from our own employees being out doing work in white neighborhoods and getting the police called on them, firefighters having the police called on them, stuff like that, because they look suspicious because they're out of place. So, and I felt like that section was really strong without that language, because you went on to describe the kind of factors, or allude to that there were specific factors that officers were charged with paying attention to. But I felt like putting suspicious behavior is kind of like a catch-all. And I know a lot of 911 calls get called in that way. There's I see a man and there's suspicious behavior. Now, obviously, if you had a chance, you'd interrogate that call. But you guys, the guys out in the field, out there on patrol, they don't get to interrogate the caller and say, well, what is the suspicious behavior? Could you give me a few more details about that? And, that you don't get to necessarily have that exchange with the person that put the call in. So I think it's better to be really explicit in this thing and talk about exactly what it is that justifies the stop or the interrogation, and not bring suspicious behavior back in. It's just too broad. And I think it's already gotten us in trouble plenty.
I appreciate your commentary on the statement, on the policy, and I'm just going to remind for the listening public that our process, when we first started this, we recognized that there was no MOR, Manual of Rules, or a charging reference. We also recognized that there was no identifiable discipline if someone were to be sustained of racial profiling. And thus, this policy that was written in 2014, only last year was the first sustained racial profiling case. And so we recognize there was a lot of work to get done. I hear you talking about the preamble, and I will start that, and I will work with Lieutenant Hubbard, hopefully, to share out something that the ad hoc can review to ensure that we have covered everything now that you, as a subject matter expert, have recommended. And I know that we are both going to take a look at M19 to figure out what appropriate updates are necessary. And obviously you're pointing out the suspicious behavior is a really great one. And
suspicious activity. I just opened the document back
up. That's okay.
Yeah, it's section C. It's under policy, this policy section C, and it's just so strong. I really, really like it, because in the next paragraph you say members seeking one or more specific persons who have identified or described. And then they talk about characteristics and relying on other characteristics in combination with and other appropriate factors. So the following paragraph is really strong, but I just worry about that dangling or suspicious activity. It kind of sits out there as an alternative bucket. And
correct.
So that just that one phrase, and otherwise I thought this policy section was, I felt like it was definitely strong. I didn't go back and compare to what it used to say, so I'm not doing a comparison. But
no, thank you. I really appreciate that. What we're going to do, I think, now is to refer to Lieutenant Hubbard to kind of walk us through so that we can make sure that all the updates are there, if that's okay. Sure.
Are there other updates as well?
Yeah, we're getting ready to go through M19 right now.
Okay. So he's going to put it on the screen. Because yeah. I did make a few comments on this electronic document. So Lieutenant Hubbard, you might see them. And there's only 2 now that I'm looking. It's one other place where I found something that I thought maybe could be beefed up. Could use a few more words, but so you may see it. I don't know. I never know how that works when I'm working on an electronic document, what actually
Yeah.
saves and what doesn't. But
Thank you.
I just want you all to know that I think this is really strong work.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I appreciate that endorsement. We have worked very diligently. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Lieutenant Hubbard.
Sure, if I can share my screen. And I think what happened was there's a lot of versions that I've created, and the one I have today is probably the most accurate to a near final product. So it's probably minus the suggestions I just heard, which are great, by the way. Thank you. A lot different than what you've already reviewed. And a lot of that has to do with, for those who don't know, we have a lot of ancillary policies that are attached to the original policy that needed a lot of cleanup. And then also alignment with the law, which is a significant section. So let me share my screen, see if I can get this.
You should be able to grab it. There you are. All right, cool.
Okay. So I really appreciate the feedback on the cultural accountability statement, and I like to wordsmith things, so I'd be happy to take that on and see if I can get close and we can work together to develop that more. So yeah, and just for Ms. Flynn, it's not, the culture accountability statement is not necessarily just specific to this policy. I keyed in on Chief Warshaw for the monitoring team. He continually references a cultural change, and I thought the best way to do that is for each of our new policies actually give an intent behind the policy through an accountability statement through the culture. And so I want this to be a habit for all of our policies, and this is actually our first policy where we started this process, so hopefully it can pick up and we can continue. Okay. The purpose has not changed that much. I apologize. I'm going to show you just the non-red line version. I did so many track changes that it literally crashed Word. So I had to create a whole new Word document just so it looks clean. So the purpose has not changed. I did clean up the California Penal Code section here, and that was a recommendation from IG Phillips. That's actually what kind of started this whole process, is she realized that this policy was not in alignment with current law. The definition, I'll read this for yourself. The definition of racial profiling definitely has been updated. I'll pause here so we can all read it. Let me zoom in a little here. Again, we might not have any edits right now, but as you receive the actual Word document, I welcome any changes you might have. Okay, so section 3 goes into specific policy, and there's going to be a lot here just because we had to import a lot of ancillary policies, like I mentioned. So I first, defined what a seizure is under the Fourth Amendment. That has not changed much. And then things that support reasonable suspicion, probable cause in section B here, that has not changed. This has not changed either. C is the same, but I do see here, I'm going to highlight this. I like that. I didn't catch that before, so I will definitely, I made notes on updating that, and I thank you for catching that. That's great. Suspicious activity, absolutely. Okay. All right. So this is a little bit confusing part here. Our old policy, I think it even says Scantron. We don't use Scantrons anymore, if you remember that.
Yes.
So ours is all over the computer. So I did a lot of policy cleanup just on officers entering the information into our field-based program, which again gets fed into our system to where we can conduct audits. So all of this section is just about how to do that. So I don't know if it's much interest of you to get into the weeds on that. I do have to run this by our IT unit just to make sure this is still applicable, because it's been a minute since I've done this. The one thing that I did change, and I'm going to scroll down just because this is all just data, stop data information, is I'll get to it in a little bit here, but we do have a problem right now with who, I know IG Phillips referenced auditing. The supervisor's in charge of making sure that the stop data form is completed correctly, but it's also the narrative section of it to make sure officers are not using words like suspicious behavior, and this is the reason why I stopped the person, or something, it has to be articulable fact. So one of the responsibilities of the supervisor is to ensure that they are reviewing this in great detail and correcting the behavior if they do come across it. For newer officers, this is probably the hardest thing to teach them, is to stop using boilerplate canned language. It's very difficult. It's a challenging thing to teach and a challenging thing for them to understand. So this is a daily practice that supervisors need to do. I see a hand up.
Lieutenant Hubbard, yeah, I was just going to stop you. Deacon Lyles.
Yeah, I'm a little uneasy about the suspicion, just taking it out. You gotta do more than that. You gotta state, why are we taking it out? Now,
yeah.
Somebody needs to correct me if I'm wrong. Assembly Bill in California 2773 amend the government code and the vehicle code, stating that officer can no longer just stop you without making articulable facts exactly why you're being stopped. Isn't that correct?
Yes, and it needs to be for unlawful behavior, and
Yes.
that's still there.
Yes.
That would still be there. It would just say unlawful activity.
So I'm saying we need to cite the section.
Ah, gotcha.
Okay.
I'm saying we need to cite the government code section. And if I'm not, I think government code 2806.5 and vehicle code 656.3.5.
Okay.
Those are the sections. So then when someone sees it, because we have taught and trained police officers and citizens that, just below probable cause is reasonable suspicion. And you can act on that. Now California said, no, wait a minute, we want to change that. So you're going to have all this residual pushback from people who've been trained differently for a long time. And we've told citizens in neighborhood groups, if you see something, say something. If something looks, out of line, call us. If it's we've told them that. So we need to cite the law because the law has changed.
That's an excellent
Okay.
recommendation.
And that's Assembly Bill 2773, but 2806, I believe, is the government code.
Okay. Yep. I will look that up.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Moving on down to consent searches. I changed. I altered this a little. The one thing that I used to teach laws of arrest, and again, the big one for me is this one, not arbitrary. Okay, so this is not. I mean, the problem with California Post, again, that I know we are tending to respond to them is, well, we can do anything as long as we have consent, but that's still. There's no procedural justice there. So I kind of made a note to myself that I want to develop this section, and I just got stuck here. So I have a little bit more work to do on consent searches. Moreover, because we have a different policy that talks about the procedure of it, but I wanted to link to racial profiling, like the history of it and why these two things don't necessarily coincide. That makes sense.
it makes sense to me because most time when you're stopped and a search is done, and then the police put in the police department report, I had consent to search, and the suspect said I didn't give him consent to search.
Mm.
Now we have a conflict.
Mhm.
And then we have the element of, if you got 3 uniformed officers standing around you, you 18 years old, and you saying, we want to search your car. Can we search your car? That's intimidating. The color of
Mhm.
authority is overwhelming in there. So I never liked consent searches.
Yeah,
If you
I
don't
agree on
see
that.
it in plain view, then that's it. Let it go.
Yeah, I agree on that intimidation factor, because even if, especially a young person consents to it, if it's based on an arbitrary reason, then pretty much setting themselves up. So
Right. And speak up a little bit more, Commissioner Garcia Costa. Your voice is so deep, it's not coming through the mic strong.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
All right. No, I was just agreeing with Deacon Lyles around just the intimidation factor either, because even if consent is given and if it's based off of an arbitrary reason, then yeah, we definitely need to address that. Appreciate that comment.
Okay, yeah, I got stuck there, but I will definitely improve that section. Conducting stops, I expanded this a little bit more. This has always been in there, but of course we want to be courteous, respectful, polite, and professional. We put in there, explain the reason for the stop while asking for identification unless impractical. I might expand on that a little bit more on the what's impractical, just because I can see people just glossing right over that. I'm gonna scroll down here in a bit about identify themselves, and the reason why this is an important section, just to give you all context, is the independent monitoring team. They review our use of force, and one of the issues that they have raised for a couple of years now are officers who are arriving on scene, um, um, confronting someone where force may be used, and assuming that that person can recognize them as a police officer just by their uniform, which isn't always the case. But also, more importantly, the subject might know who the police are, but the community doesn't. So they hear a lot of noise, a lot of commotion, but they don't know what's going on. So we really expanded this, and I actually wrote this as a separate policy that's still being reviewed by the monitoring team, but we felt appropriate to actually put it in here. And I'm not necessarily sold on that. We might need to move it around, but I will talk about that here shortly. Letter D, the length of detention is no longer than necessary to take appropriate action. Answer questions the person may have regarding the stop and explain the disposition of the stop. And then also apologize for the inconvenience when appropriate. So we want really a good community policing aspect to all seizures, Fourth Amendment seizures.
To your point, Lieutenant Hubbard, the new law that came in place in January, should we be referencing that as it relates to explaining the reason for the stop, or no?
Sure. No, I like that. I like to reference things. New law. I will put that in there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So here's the new section that I wrote about officer. Yeah. Sure.
Lieutenant Hubbard, Director
Can we go
Flynn has her
back?
hand up.
Yeah, can we go back? That was the other section that I had a comment on. Back to conducting stops. So another thing about doing equity work is that we are always keeping our eye on racial disparities, and we have some racial disparities about handcuffing during stops. And I don't know exactly what it would say or how you would put it, but I think that handcuffing would be addressed in this section, because this is where it was coming up in the data, that Black people being stopped were way disproportionately handcuffed, most often let go, not for any particular legitimate reason, because they were never arrested, but they got to spend time in handcuffs. That to me sounds like something that is detrimental to the relationship with the community and individual attitudes about police and policing. So, I mean, it just seems like this is the place maybe to try to figure out what to say about handcuffing. I'm sure there are some policies about it, but there doesn't seem like they're probably being applied equally or without bias. So if they could be repeated here, it might be helpful. I don't know what the policy is about handcuffing or is supposed to be, but we know we have disparities.
I
Yeah.
think handcuffing should have its own ad hoc committee.
Well,
It's-
maybe.
Oh, no, that's
Powerful.
a whole, the handcuffing policy is a whole nother policy, and I'm hoping
We
that,
need to do it.
no, there's no question in my mind. I want to get this done. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to start that maybe by August. I know that we've got, not only the discipline, but then we're going to be looking at the training module for racial profiling. So I think we still have a lot of work ahead of us, but there's no question. And I definitely want to work on that, particularly as it relates to handcuffing with youth. And there may not be any distinction between the two in the policy. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at it lately.
Can I interject right here?
Please. I'm sorry, Chair. Yes.
Ann Jenks of the Coalition for Police Accountability has formed a group to begin exploring the handcuffing policy.
Yep.
So we're working on it in the background.
Good stuff.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yep. Thank you for that. All right. So this entire section is brand new. Again, I wrote this as a separate policy. We really didn't know where to insert it. There's a lot to read here, but I did kind of similar of a cultural accountability statement, just the importance of officers identifying themselves. And then we created two sections here. One where identification is mandatory, which I know it references this policy, and I did that on purpose just so I don't lose sight of it in case it does get kicked to a different one. But we included things like, hey, if you're undercover or plainclothes operation, obviously we shouldn't be identifying ourselves. If there's some environmental factors that play a role in that, executing search or arrest warrants where when we're not going to notice, that's a whole other discussion, but that's mandatory per law, actually, that we have to announce ourselves as the police. When we're assisting other agencies, identify themselves when feasible, on duty but not in uniform. So in scenarios where we have to put ourselves on duty, during protests or demonstrations, in our crowd control policy, we have to identify ourselves in our announcements to the crowd if we were going to do dispersal orders. When interacting with the vulnerable population, heightened awareness, sensitive to identifying themselves, it's people suffering from mental illness or disabilities. Sometimes they just they're not in a position to where they would acknowledge or understand that we're the police. So very important that we understand that. If requested by a citizen, we have to identify themselves. And then in situations where identification cannot be presumed, as if like I'm making a phone call, I need to identify themselves. We did create a section here where it could be assumed. So emergency response. So these are in high stress situations where there's a rapid response. A lot of officers on scene, let's say lights and sirens are activated, and we're dealing with a critical incident. If we're in a marked patrol car, and we use kind of the reasonableness rule, reasonably seen by those in the vicinity that we're the police, that's where identification may be assumed. Also, when one is in uniform, with the clear insignia, a uniform, etc., may be assumed. Large scale operations, if we're dealing with a sideshow, a tactical team operation, or mass arrest where multiple officers are present, again, we use a reasonableness standard. And then at public events. Okay, the one thing that I'm struggling with just in this section, of course, you see I'm kind of stumbling over my words here. I don't want these two things to be mutually exclusive. Similar to the consent searches, I want people to understand the racial implications and the bias implications of us not identifying ourselves. So I want to make sure I merge those two things together, but I did put this in here just because it is an important topic right now at OPD.
You know, I wish there was some way we can make a statement about officers should not take offense for having to identify themselves. I mean, if we could take that away, like, sure, Reggie Lyles is my name, you know, as opposed to, what's your badge number? What's your name? And, you know, it's right here. Look right here. All of that tension that goes down on a pedestrian stop and a vehicle stop when the officer, the professional, ought to be the one in control and quickly saying, you know, my name is Sergeant Lyles.
Yeah,
You know?
respectfully.
Yeah. So there's no need to take offense.
Yeah,
Maybe that should be trained in the FTO program or stressed some kind of way. You know, because
I think that makes sense.
Stumbling block. That's how things build up right there. You know, guy says, "What's your badge number?" And the guy in the uniform gets all huffy about that.
Right.
It's not necessary.
Well, it's usually because it's connected to somebody that'll file a complaint, and you know, the offering of your identity should be, like I said, respectful, not insulting, not aggressive, not overly proud.
Right.
Just this is who I am.
It ought to be automatic.
Yeah.
It you know, because it's federal law, state law, everything.
That's right.
Got to be identified. So.
Okay. Yep. I think this is an appropriate place to put that. So I will add that. We can move it around later if it doesn't fit. Okay. I left the examples of racial profiling in here. I was toying with the idea of moving this maybe to more of an appendix as opposed to just in the middle of this policy. I might add a couple more examples just because these are relevant, but a little bit outdated just because it was in the original policy. But these remained. I made a couple of edits, but okay. This is about stop data collection. So this was a separate policy that I put into here just because it's essential for officers to know when they have to complete a stop data form, which is for all detentions, arrests, and then encounters resulting in a search or request a search. So nothing has changed in this section, with the exception of, as we scroll down, this is all just, you know, data entry. I really added to this section about member responsibilities. And then I did put it, this is rare. So I don't know if the chief will sign off on this, but I did put the actual manual of rules section that we all came up with right here within the policy.
I think that's
and I'm okay with that. Yeah, we've never done. I'm just saying we've never done that, so it's more of a consistency issue. But you know, it's fine by me.
Well, you know, it's an interesting thing because a lot of people wanted the commission, and the commission is not made up of police officers. We're working in partnership to update policies, and so therefore, perhaps some of the infrastructure, format, content things should be a little bit more flexible. Because as we have talked about, you know, historically over the last 5 or 6 years, community doesn't always understand why is it that way. And the answer can't keep being because it's always been that way. I mean, this policy hasn't been updated since 2004. That's 20 years. A lot has changed. And that's why we're making so many updates as it relates to laws. But, you know, I think it's a great addition. We can sort it out later. But I see Chair Peterson's hand. Chair Peterson?
I'm always concerned, and I want to first thank Lieutenant Hubbard. You always are trying to be the most progressive in this space. But I guess when we say you want to be consistent, we can't be consistent anymore. there has to be some element of real change. And that might mean that you do drop sections like this in to remind officers, this is why we're doing this.
Mhm.
And it's serious and you will be held accountable for it. So hold on to your hat, because I think you're going to see more and more of this change. And I know how resistant people are to change, but this is our moment. This is our time to make these kinds of changes that swing the culture away from what they've always done, because always done often is the reason why we're in the situation we're in. And we
Yes,
have to
and
change our thinking around that. So I appreciate always that you're open, and we're hoping that openness will spread to the
absolutely.
cultural
And
change that we're looking for. Thank you.
yes, and the commentary around having to look at 2 or 3 policies to figure out where something is, I think it's really efficient to put all these things in the one document.
I actually believe that the strategy of putting in several documents is a way to bury it by not
Correct.
acting like you're burying it. We got to call it like it is. So we got to do things dramatically different if we want cultural change. And I appreciate not wanting to offend anyone, but I really want to get it right more than worrying about somebody being offended. I
Correct.
really want to get it right. And if they're offended, then we get somebody else to be the police.
And I'd like to also tag on to Deacon Lyle's comments. It is always amazing to me when I'm in a discipline committee and something is silent. And therefore, because it's silent, there's a sense that the behavior should go unaccounted for or somehow be mitigated. So the more we put in to the policy, the direct language that's applicable, where it's found in policy, we would always want to therefore say, well, if it doesn't say explicitly, this is the spirit and tone of this particular provision, that no, it doesn't say you shouldn't do X on a Tuesday, and I did X on a Tuesday. So because I did it on a Tuesday, I shouldn't be held accountable for it, even though it's gross misconduct. So you see what I'm saying? I'm just saying it's more, the more we can be definite, explicit, cross-citing the policy that applies, I think the closer we're getting to at least writing in the policy what are the expectations, and therefore what you are being held accountable for.
And now I see Darlene's hand.
Oh, thank you. On that section before, Lieutenant Hubbard, where you were overviewing when an officer is required to make a report, is that? Yeah, stop data collection. So every stop is not necessarily, a report isn't only certain stops. If there's detention, arrest, searches.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I've just never seen this policy before. So that's enlightening to me. So this is another place where I think detention should probably include handcuffing, because I think detention I assume means arrest.
Handcuffing is arrest.
Well, no, it's not. Handcuffing is not arrest.
It can be a part of the detention also. So yes. So
this is a place where you could flag handcuffing.
Yeah.
I mean, I realize that might be a change. I'm just make a footnote. Yeah, as you're working on your handcuffing policy, I think the way we got the handcuffing data was through body cam footage. But in fact, I think if you want to have a good feedback loop about handcuffing, And I assume this appears in more than one policy. If you want to have a feedback loop about handcuffing, you ask officers to explain why they handcuff someone. That's why I think it should go into the reporting category.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So I
Great.
have another question then.
Yes.
Is detention also broadly interpreted as the inability of the individual to exercise free movement?
Correct.
So
it's a
it
law
doesn't have to be a
enforcement seizure. Yeah.
handcuffing. It could be just,
Yes.
I've seen, body worn camera where you are approaching someone and they feel they have no way of getting away or running
Yeah.
or whatever. They feel like their freedom to move, to disengage, if you will, is prohibited or is somehow impacted by the superior presence and power of a police officer.
And to that
Is there
point,
a definition of detention?
Yes.
good question. Mhm.
Is there?
There, there
Lieutenant?
is. Yeah, there is.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, well, what is it?
Oh, it's not. It's not in here, but it's basically it's where an authority is exercised where a regional person would not feel free to leave.
Okay, so I kind of hit it.
Yeah.
So, is there going to be a definition section in this policy?
I do have a glossary at the end, and I can certainly add detention, arrest, and also consensual encounters as in the glossary section. I'll show you that here in a bit.
Okay, please, thank you.
All right. Okay. Okay, so this is the entire section of the manual of rules that I put in here. I think we've already
Excuse me.
reviewed that. Yeah.
Excuse me for a second, Lieutenant Hubbard. I'm hearing background, like maybe there's a TV on or something. Can we either mute our cameras or turn off any additional noise? Unless, of course, it's children. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Complaints. I think I might have doubled this up, but there's a section in here about complaints, and this is just a reference. This is it. So racial profiling, other bias-based policing, it's considered a class 1 violation. So there are specific rules in our complaint taking process on how to handle those. Basically, it needs to be immediate notification to the internal affairs division, supervisor notification, or if unavailable, the watch commander. I'm going to probably update that because I like to quote the actual policy. I did it above, and I'll do that again. So as I read this out loud, I definitely want to fix that. So this is a new section based on the law. I literally took the Penal Code section 13519 and summarized it as follows. So each officer has to complete the training, okay, per post standards, and we've already talked about that, how that can be improved. So we have, of course, different ambitions on how we can improve on that just internally within OPD. And then according to the regulation, there needs to be refresher training every 5 years. But again, okay, I'll highlight this section too. So this is the post standard. We can certainly, and we've done this in other policies, made it more restrictive, as in less than 5 years, whatever the cadence wants to be, we can certainly put that in there.
Yeah, that's certainly something that I've also been thinking around psychological evaluations, making those more, that doesn't relate to this, just in general, that it needs to be done more because you all deal with so much more.
Yeah. So I'll earmark that just in case we want to address that later. And then I put in here also the training commander. This is in alignment with the law, but something that I think we definitely need to develop more. He or she needs to ensure that we have lineup training on racial profiling, and it's at least annually. And that for us is usually in the form of or continual police training, which officers go through annually in the classroom. So it's a little bit better, I think, than lineup training because we have specific instructors that teach this. But there's also a section here about what shall be in the curriculum, which includes all of these. So perspectives, cultural differences, negative impact of bias, prejudices, history and role of civil and human rights movements, the obligations of police officers in preventing, reporting, and responding to discriminatory practices, perspectives, and then prohibition per the penal code. And this section also can be developed. This is literally just what the law says, but we can definitely expand on this if we want the curriculum to be more in depth.
Excuse me, let me interrupt for a moment. Chair Peterson, is your hand up newly, or had you not taken it down from the last comment?
My hand is up.
Okay.
There's a reference to post, and I understand what post is, but earlier I saw a reference to TOST. What's that?
Oh, yeah. That is our hostage negotiators. So basically, when we have a crowd control operation, they are the ones who are giving announcements to the crowd. So that's in our crowd control policy. I need to spell that out though. So thank you for catching that.
Yes, yeah.
Excellent.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll make a separate note so we don't. Okay,
Thank you. It was much earlier.
Yeah, no, I know exactly where that's at. Thank you for catching that. So this is supervisor responsibility. Not much has changed here, except for one thing, which I'll talk about in the next section. But yeah, it's basically not engage and ignore, condone racial profiling, responsible for knowing and complying with this policy, making sure that their subordinates are well aware of this policy, ensure subordinate personnel comply with the provisions of this order, be subject to disciplinary action if they fail to comply with this, and then also if they knew or of the violation from their subordinates, and they will also be held accountable. Not much has changed in that section. The next section, though, is pretty significant, and the reason why this is going to be a big one right here, the shift supervisor. So if I am assigned to Sergeant A today, but tomorrow I'm assigned to Sergeant B, they are my shift supervisor when I am completing this detention and filling out the paperwork. It is Sergeant B's responsibility to audit it that day. And that's really important because sometimes these things just get lost in these systems and they're not reviewed for weeks or months later. And we're not staying on top of this policy. So I really put the responsibility at the end of one shift, barring exigent circumstances, because there are, they need to review and approve or not approve these reports. Yeah.
Has this been an ongoing problem, or is it in peaks and valleys?
It's an ongoing problem. I felt it more now that I'm assigned to our Inspector General's office, because I look at data and a lot of the data has just not been reconciled because it's been sitting in limbo. This will fix it if this is approved, because it's every day this needs to be reviewed, audited, and in the system so it can be accounted for.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I really don't see any pushback on this just from the supervisor level. They're not going to, it's more of just the workload. It's not difficult to approve these because our system will not accept field investigative reports that are not filled out properly. The only thing that the supervisor really has to do that's in depth is ensure that the narrative aligns with what the officer did, and making sure that it aligns with this policy and our other policies. Yeah. Okay, so this basically just kind of enumerates then what the supervisor has to review, which includes the narrative, all the categories within the system, etc. And then this is somewhat of a new section in here, ensuring non-discriminating practices. Just review and make sure that, okay, when you're reading the narrative, did the officer verify the reasons for the investigative encounters, consent searches, if applicable, the stops, ensuring these actions are not based on an individual's race, ethnicity, or national origin, checking that there's searches are clear and leaves no room for ambiguity, and making sure that observable facts and circumstances justify the actions taken. and there's definitely going to be a learning curve to what this means. And I look forward to that training to where I can provide some tips and tricks on how to do that properly.
Great.
Okay. So this is a new section because our old policy referenced OIG, and now we're considered Office of Internal Accountability. So this mandates that I conduct, and I'll just say me because I'm the commander of the unit, annual reviews and audits of our stop data. Okay, and ensure that I report it to the chief of police. I may want to expand this more. The IMT the monitoring team may have some suggestions on what they want to see more on this, but minimally there will be an annual inspection and a report to the chief of police. This section was a major overhaul because as you saw in our previous policy, a lot of the coalitions that were listed no longer exist or they merged. So I wanted our relationship to be strong with the Department of Race and Equity. And I kind of left it generalized there, but that's where I really like us to partner. And I left it kind of wide open on like what that really means. It could be working together to apply for grants or training new personnel or all these other things. But I really wanted this to be a solid section here.
That's great. I don't think you have any problem with that, do you, Darlene?
I don't, but I think maybe I might want to juice up your language a little bit because, I mean, the Department of Race and Equity just does a certain thing. We don't do everything. We do training. We do system change analysis, racial equity impact analysis. So I think because the Department of Race and Equity is relatively unknown in the department, with a few exceptions, we haven't had a chance to touch everybody or inform everybody about what we do. We might want to make this language not quite so broad. And the reason
Sure.
I say this is that sometimes people get confused because we're called Race and
Yeah.
Equity. They think we're all things race and equity. And of course, we don't do discrimination complaints. We don't investigate we're not an investigatory office. And, so I can give you a few words for in here.
Thank you.
Great.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and last but not least, the glossary. So this is at the very end. Obviously, I need to add some more definitions here, but this was in line with what IG Phillips requested. And just a one pager, but I'll certainly add to this.
Terrific. And so you'll add even the handcuffing and the other clarifications that have been raised this evening.
Detention was the other one.
Thank you.
I know this is a bunch of weird notes I'm making, but it makes sense to me. So I will definitely make these changes.
That's okay. Thank you.
Okay. I know
see.
we're short on time, but any other questions for me?
Deacon Lyles has his hand
Yeah.
up.
Oh, my apologies. I missed it. Thank you.
I just put it up. I'm uncomfortable about the handcuffing situation, detention versus arrest, because it's easy for us to set ourselves up to be shot down because, a police officer can handcuff anyone almost on any situation that they think is reasonable. And the law uses the word reasonable suspicion. So, but in the law, they have 849. I think the best thing we can do in my mind is that, look, if you're going to handcuff somebody, it needs to be documented. So we can have some data behind it, who's getting handcuffed and what officers doing all the handcuffing and why. And
that's exactly what I don't know how the system is currently set up.
Yeah.
If there's a detention, then a report has to be filed. But does the report require to explain things like handcuffing?
See, that's what I'm driving at.
I think that it's useful to have people stop and think about, why am I handcuffing this person? How am I going to explain that? Right. That's all. It's not that people can't be handcuffed. That's not the policy I'm trying to write here. I just want people to stop and think about, how am I going to explain why I'm handcuffing this person and didn't handcuff the last person, I stopped. Yeah.
Because it may be not be determined a use of force, but in fact, it kind of is.
In my mind, it is. It's pretty
Yeah.
forceful. I've never been handcuffed. I'm sure I would not enjoy it.
No,
I've worked real hard to try not to be, but I mean, my point is that I think it is rough. It can be particularly psychologically rough on young people.
Yep.
And so I know that, you know, sometimes young people look like adults to people, and especially if they're Black. So, you know, there's just a lot. This is a place where we want to raise people's thinking about their practice, right?
Now, I'm
Yeah.
agreeing with all of that, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to forge something that that can help and also get at what you're getting at.
Yeah, we're in
Yeah.
agreement.
What I'm saying
I feel we're agree-
is
Yeah.
the law says that any officer, and I was a police officer for 30 some years. So
Mhm.
and so any officer can handcuff anyone if they think, not anybody else think, that they think that it's for their safety. They can do it. And then if they unhandcuff them, they can do that too, under 849B of the Penal
Right.
Code. So if we wrote in the policy that, look, if you're handcuffing people, you got to document it. That
And
gets
tell
that
'em why.
stop that you're talking about, Ms. Flynn, where they
Right.
say, well, wait a minute, if I handcuff this person, I'm gonna have to write it because of it. If I didn't write that report, that 849B report, that I unhandcuffed him, that I let that person go, I violated our departmental policy. And we can keep data on that, and we can find out what officers there's always handcuffing people indiscriminately, and if they're only handcuffing women or they're only handcuffing Black or brown people.
Right.
And so
I see.
that's what I'm driving at.
No problem. I see Commissioner Garcia Acosta's hand up.
That's absolutely critical. And to be able to capture that data, be able to cross-reference it, because if you're able to detain somebody without actually putting handcuffs, it would be really interesting to see the disparities between the communities that get quote unquote detained without handcuffs versus times that handcuffs have to be used. And if the individual officer has that discretion, then we need those data points to be able to compare and analyze those stops accordingly.
Exactly.
And that data has been done in Los Angeles, it's been done in San Francisco, and everything you think that is wrong, the data shows that it is wrong. So there's no two ways about it. But here in Oakland, in OPD, we're writing this policy. If we say, you know, we don't want you to handcuff people on a detention, we're going to lose that. We're going to lose that because the law allows that to happen. And so we need to say, look, if you're going to handcuff people, you got to write an 849B report if you didn't arrest them and bring them in. You got to let us know why you let them go. Why did you handcuff him? Why did you let them go?
Well, I think that we should definitely put it in there. Obviously, it's got to go through the chief. It's got to go through the IMT. But let's do it the way we think best. And I also believe that they need to explain why it is that they're handcuffing.
That in that 849B report could be a line there. Why did you handcuff this person?
Correct. But I'm saying if you're going to handcuff me, I want you to tell me why.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Lieutenant Hubbard, do you have any thoughts on that?
he looks a little kind of bewildered about where we're going with this, but I know that recently watching some body-worn camera footage and the attempt to handcuff someone, not only were we concerned about not having any articulated reason given to the person who was being handcuffed, but the name of the officer, a lot of stuff was just not done. And so unless we make it explicit that you have to do X, Y, and Z, unless it is just and I know this isn't a word you would use, but highly unreasonable to do so, but extremely dangerous not to do so. That should be the protocol. I know Deacon Lyles is having a little struggle with that.
Yeah, because I agree with you, but I know the existing law, I'm talking about federal law, allows the police, whatever they think goes. If they think it's for their safety or for the subjects who's detained safety, they can put on handcuffs. And
Yes.
when you unhandcuff someone, the law that allows you to do that or unarrest someone is 849B of the Penal Code. Now we can use that and say that's where we want a reason why you handcuff this person, and that's where we could gather the data so we can find out. Oh, it's Officer Lyles that's handcuffing people 15 times a month,
left and right. Yeah.
Why? What's wrong with him? You know.
Yeah.
Maybe that could get at the reason why. Get to the point where we say, get away from unreasonable handcuffing.
Well, see, the reason
Lieutenant Hubbard,
that they may, what it sounds to me when I see those cases, it is always subjective. I felt fear.
And the law gives them that.
right.
Yeah, I felt fear.
Lieutenant Hubbard, can you share what you're thinking, what you might be challenged by, your thoughts, opinions?
I'm sorry.
No challenge. We do document all handcuffing incidents. The one thing I think this discussion is great, and I think it warrants a whole section within this policy, because I don't want it to be mutually exclusive of, well, you just checked the box saying you handcuffed. It's the narrative that goes with it.
Yep.
But I hear everything that you're saying. I'm sorry, I'm not perplexed by what you're saying. I'm just thinking through how I'm going to write it. So I'm comfortable.
And we recognize that is a challenge unto itself.
Yeah.
But I just, sometimes when different members are like exceedingly quiet, I want to ask if that is real or imagined and why. So thank you for explaining. So I know that we are at time. We're actually a little over. Okay. Is this a good stopping place? I mean, we're at the glossary. That is the end, right, Lieutenant Hubbard?
It is the end.
Okay, so what we will do is first and foremost do an extraordinary thank you to Darlene, because you have named a bunch of things that are exceedingly important, and we may have figured them out, but you gave us a through line, and that was really, really, valuable. Always love the exciting conversation. And the references to penal codes, we can always count on Deacon Lyles to help us with another footnote. So I love this. And what I will do is I will get with Lieutenant Hubbard to begin to frame out a preamble. We will make sure that Darlene gets a chance to look at it before our next meeting for you all to take a look and discuss. In the meantime, I know that we are also looking to you, Chair, when you do meet with Chief Mitchell, to mention to him our conversation about the racial profiling training that Race and Equity has done in partnership with OPD, and hoping that he will participate as soon as we can, they can get it all set up. Meanwhile, I will also approach Interim Deputy Chief Chavies to see if he will help broker that conversation and who he would recommend partner, if it's not himself, with Darlene on that for the city.
So it's not really racial profiling training.
I'm sorry. What's it called?
It's called Advancing Racial Equity. It's a general
Racial
foundation for
It's
how
what?
we do.
Repeat that.
It's called Advancing Racial Equity.
Advancing Racial Equity.
Equity Academy. And it's basically the whole framework of how we do racial equity work in the city of Oakland. And by the way, commissioners can attend this. It does happen in the daytime, but if anybody,
I want to come.
Well,
I
yeah,
definitely
reach out
plan
to
to
my
come.
office. We will send you the Zoom link. You can be there.
Okay,
No,
Thank you.
commissioners come periodically. Just it's then you all will know what we're teaching to city staff. It's
Yes.
not the one that's tailored to policing, the one that we do on
Yes.
an ongoing basis, but it's the same content.
Sure. Well, thank you for clarifying. My apologies for misspeaking.
Okay.
And I just want to,
I wouldn't be able to do the other. I don't know that training.
yeah, right. Well, that's the one that we want the chief to participate in.
Yeah.
But that said, love our very thoughtful and innovative conversations. Really appreciate all the work, Lieutenant Hubbard, that you're doing when we're not on these calls to help prep us for these extraordinary conversations. So thank you, Chair Peterson, Commissioner Garcia Acosta, Deacon Lyles, Lieutenant Hubbard, Darlene as our special guest, and certainly if you want to come back and join us, we meet every 2 weeks. Otherwise, we will talk offline about your additional review of the preamble. And for our listening public, I just want to thank you for tuning in, and send your comments in the chat, send us emails. This is one of the most important policies that we have to update. It has been 20 years, and we want to make sure that it will last and be current and applicable for the next 20. With that, I want to thank you, and we are going to say good night.
good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Thank
for having
you.
me. I appreciated the time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Darlene. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.